Mafia boss's daughter asked, "Are you my mommy?" to Waitress. What he did changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Isabella Santos had always been a quiet observer, blending into the background of life. At 24, she had learned the art of staying unnoticed, working long shifts at the upscale restaurant in downtown Manhattan. Her routine was predictable and safe: serve the rich and powerful, smile, and go home to her cramped apartment on the Upper East Side. Life was tough, but she had learned to manage. But that night, everything was about to change. It started like any other evening. The restaurant's grand chandeliers glittered above her, the air thick with the hum of laughter and clinking glasses. Isabella moved through the room, balancing trays of drinks and flashing polite smiles. She had a job to do, and she did it well, though her mind often wandered to thoughts of her future, thoughts of a life far away from the chaos of this restaurant and the constant struggle to make ends meet. But tonight, something felt different. A man entered the restaurant. His presence felt before he even crossed the threshold. Tall, well-dressed, his dark eyes scanning the room like a predator searching for prey. He was accompanied by a little girl, no older than 6 or 7, with wide eyes and a silent demeanor. Isabella had seen them before, the wealthy, the powerful. But this man was different. His air of authority was unmistakable. The way the crowd seemed to part for him, as though they instinctively knew who he was and what he represented. He sat down with his daughter in the VIP section, the weight of his gaze never leaving Isabella as she made her rounds. It was a look that sent a chill down her spine, but she couldn't figure out why. Moments later, as Isabella was clearing plates from another table, she heard a soft voice. "Are you my mommy?" She froze. She knew that voice, but it didn't make sense. The little girl was looking up at her with innocent eyes, waiting for an answer. Isabella felt her heart skip a beat. "What?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Are you my mommy?" the little girl repeated, her gaze unblinking. Isabella stood there, frozen, not knowing how to respond. It was one of those surreal moments that felt like it couldn't be real. But there was something in the girl's eyes, something so vulnerable that Isabella couldn't bring herself to turn away. She glanced at the man who had been watching her. His expression was unreadable, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made her feel exposed. A silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. The man stood up then, and as he walked toward her, his presence filled the space, closing the distance between them with an almost predatory grace. "She doesn't speak to just anyone," he said in a deep, accented voice, his eyes narrowing slightly as they locked onto hers. "Who are you?" Isabella asked, her voice shaking slightly despite her attempt to remain composed. The man's lips curved into a small smile, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm her father," he said simply. "And you are?" His gaze remained fixed on her, an unspoken challenge in his words. Isabella swallowed, feeling a sense of unease creeping up her spine. She had never felt this way about anyone before, and certainly never about someone who didn't even know her name. But there was something about him, something dangerous, yet magnetic, that pulled her in. "I'm just a waitress," she said quietly. "I'm just here to do my job." The man studied her for a moment longer, as if weighing her words, then nodded. "It seems you are," he said, his voice cold, but not unkind. "But you'll find that in this world, jobs can change in the blink of an eye." Isabella didn't understand what he meant, but she had a feeling that before the night was over, she would. The man's words hung in the air, thick with tension. Isabella stood frozen, her heart racing. She had never imagined that a simple evening shift at a restaurant would lead to a moment like this. The man, who she now understood to be the father of the little girl, had stepped closer, his presence overpowering the already elegant but subdued atmosphere of the upscale restaurant. She felt like a deer caught in the headlights, unable to move, unable to speak. The girl's innocent question still echoed in her mind. "Are you my mommy?" Isabella swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure. It was a strange question, one that didn't make any sense, but there was something about the girl's eyes, those big, round, expectant eyes, that made Isabella's heart ache. Her mind raced as she glanced back at the man, hoping for some kind of explanation, but his expression remained unreadable. The silence between them stretched out, growing more uncomfortable with every passing second. He was studying her closely, as though trying to figure out if she was worthy of an answer. "I'm sorry," Isabella said, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't mean to, no." The man interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "You didn't do anything wrong." His eyes softened slightly, but there was a sharpness to them that couldn't be ignored. "My daughter has been through a lot, and she's not used to trusting people." Isabella nodded, still unsure of what to say. She had no experience with children, let alone children who had been through trauma. But there was something so fragile about the girl's presence that it stirred something deep inside Isabella. "I understand," Isabella said quietly. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should say more, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. I'm just doing my job," she added, a little too quickly. The man watched her for a moment longer before nodding. "I know, but sometimes people need more than just a job." Isabella didn't know how to respond to that. Her mind was still racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. She had worked in this restaurant for years, serving all kinds of people, but none of them had ever made her feel this way. There was something magnetic about this man, something dangerous, but also strangely comforting. "She's been asking that question for a while now," the man continued, his gaze never leaving Isabella's face. "She lost her mother when she was very young, and it's been difficult for her to accept anyone else in that role." Isabella's heart ached at the mention of the little girl's mother. She couldn't imagine what it would be like to lose a parent at such a young age, to grow up without the person who should have been there to guide and protect you. "I'm sorry," Isabella said, feeling a pang of sympathy for the girl. "I didn't mean to intrude. I'll go get her some juice or something." But the man stopped her with a single word. "No." Isabella turned to face him, confused. "I don't want you to leave," he said, his voice softer now, though still commanding. "In fact, I think you might be just the person she needs." Isabella blinked, unsure of what he meant. "I don't understand," she admitted. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, but his lips curved into a small, almost amused smile. "You'll understand soon enough," he said cryptically. "But for now, just stay with her. She needs someone, and I think you might be the one who can help her." Isabella stood there, speechless. She had no idea what he was asking of her. She was just a waitress. She had no experience with children, especially not one who had clearly been through something so traumatic. But as she glanced at the little girl, still standing by the table with those wide, hopeful eyes, she couldn't bring herself to say no. "All right," Isabella said finally, though she didn't quite know what she was agreeing to. The man gave her a nod, as if he had expected her response. "I'll be in the back if you need anything," he said, before turning and walking away, leaving Isabella standing there with the little girl. For a moment, Isabella wasn't sure what to do. She wasn't even sure if the girl would speak to her, let alone allow her to help. But when the girl looked up at her with those big, innocent eyes again, Isabella felt a strange pull in her chest. She knelt down to the girl's level, trying to make herself as small and non-threatening as possible. "Hey there," she said softly, offering a small smile. "What's your name?" The girl didn't answer immediately, but after a long pause, she finally whispered, "Lila." Isabella's heart melted at the sound of her name. "Well, Lila," Isabella said gently, "I'm Isabella. How about we go get some juice, huh?" Lila nodded slowly, and for the first time since their interaction began, she smiled. A small, fragile smile, but it was a smile nonetheless. Isabella stood up and guided the little girl to the counter where the juice was being prepared. She wasn't sure what she was getting herself into, but as she looked down at Lila, something told her that her life was about to change in a way she never expected. The small smile on Lila's face lingered in Isabella's mind as they made their way to the counter. She could feel her heart tugging at the sight of the little girl, so lost, yet trying so hard to reach out. Isabella glanced up to see the man, her father, standing near the entrance to the VIP section, watching them closely. His gaze was steady, but there was something unreadable in it. Isabella didn't know whether it was approval, concern, or simply a warning to tread carefully. She had been around powerful people before, but this man, he exuded a presence that commanded respect and fear. "Here you go, Lila," Isabella said softly, handing the little girl a small cup of orange juice. Lila took it carefully, her small fingers wrapping around the plastic cup as if it were the most precious thing in the world. She didn't speak, but the way she sipped the juice slowly, with a focused intensity, told Isabella that Lila was grateful for the gesture. It wasn't much, but it was something. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, and Isabella didn't know how to break the silence. She wasn't sure if she was supposed to keep talking to the girl, or if she was just supposed to stay there and be a quiet presence. The man, Lila's father, was still watching them from across the room. Isabella felt like she was in a fishbowl, and every movement was being scrutinized. She had no idea what kind of man this mafia boss was, but she knew she was now part of something far bigger than her usual world of trays, tips, and endless shifts. Finally, Lila spoke, her voice small but clear. "Are you my mommy?" Isabella's heart skipped a beat, and for a second, she wasn't sure how to respond. She hadn't expected the question again. "No, sweetie," she said gently, kneeling down so she was eye level with the girl. "I'm not your mommy, but I'm here to help." Lila's eyes widened, her curiosity piqued by the answer. "Then why do you care about me?" she asked, her voice almost too mature for her age. Isabella hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to explain. "Because you seem like you need someone," she said finally, choosing the truth. Lila's gaze softened for a moment, as if she understood on some deeper level that she couldn't articulate. It was in the way she held the juice cup a little tighter, the way she looked at Isabella like she was trying to figure out if she could trust her. Before Isabella could say anything more, the man approached them, his footsteps steady and purposeful. Isabella looked up to find him standing in front of her, his presence filling the space like a heavy fog. He towered over her, but his eyes were focused on his daughter. "Lila," he said softly, his voice low and commanding. "You need to go with Sophia. It's time for bed." Lila didn't protest, but there was a sadness in her eyes as she handed her empty cup back to Isabella. "Okay, Daddy." The man, Lila's father, gently took her hand, guiding her away from Isabella. As they walked toward the back of the restaurant, Isabella couldn't help but watch them. There was something haunting about the way Lila walked beside him, her tiny hand swallowed by the man's large one. Isabella wondered what kind of life the little girl had lived, what kind of pain she had endured to make her so wary of trusting anyone. The man paused at the entrance to the VIP section, looking back at Isabella. His eyes were colder now, calculating. "Thank you," he said, his tone almost as if he was acknowledging her role in his daughter's brief moment of comfort. Isabella nodded, unsure of what else to say. "It's nothing," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't respond immediately, just stared at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he spoke again, his words deliberate. "I know what you are, what you do. But make no mistake, this is not your world. It's a world of consequences, and you've just stepped into it." Isabella swallowed, her breath catching in her throat. She had no idea what he meant, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. "I'm just a waitress," she said, trying to steady her voice. "I'm just here to do my job." The man studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "We all do what we must to survive," he said, his voice softer now. "But remember, some debts are paid in ways you never expect." With that, he turned and walked away, his long strides carrying him quickly toward the back of the restaurant. Isabella stood there, frozen, watching him disappear into the shadows. She felt a knot tightening in her stomach, the weight of his words sinking in. She was now tangled up in something far bigger than herself, and she wasn't sure if she could find a way out. But as she turned to go back to her duties, she couldn't shake the image of Lila's eyes. The trust, the sadness, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would take care of her. Isabella didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't turn her back on this little girl. No matter how dangerous the world around her was, she had to help. The days that followed felt like a blur to Isabella. She had returned to her regular life as best as she could, but her mind kept wandering back to the strange encounter with Lila and her father. Each time she stepped into the restaurant, she couldn't shake the image of the little girl's sad eyes. It haunted her, even in the busiest of hours when she was rushing between tables. The weight of those few words, "Are you my mommy?" seemed to echo in her mind, and no matter how hard she tried, Isabella couldn't forget them. One afternoon, just a few days later, Isabella was busy wiping down a table near the front of the restaurant when the familiar tall figure appeared again. This time, it wasn't just a brief passing glance. He was standing near the bar, observing her with an intensity that made her stop what she was doing. She felt her heart rate quicken, a mix of fear and curiosity. The man, whom she still didn't know much about, made his way toward her with that same powerful presence. It was as if the room parted for him, just like it had when he first arrived. As he approached, Isabella found herself standing a little straighter, unconsciously trying to appear more composed. "Isabella," he said, his voice low and steady. "I trust you're doing well." She swallowed, trying not to let her nervousness show. "I'm fine," she replied, offering a small, polite smile. "Just working as usual." The man's lips twitched slightly, almost as if he were amused by her response, but there was no warmth in his expression. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. Then he glanced over his shoulder at the entrance, where a few more patrons had just walked in. "I'm here for business, but there's something I need to discuss with you. Privately." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. The way he said privately made it clear that this wasn't just a casual conversation. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should politely decline, but something told her that turning him down wasn't an option. "All right," she said quietly, nodding toward the back of the restaurant. The man led the way, and Isabella followed him down a narrow hallway to a small, secluded office. It was dimly lit, and the air smelled faintly of leather and expensive cologne. Isabella took a seat in the chair opposite his desk, her mind racing. "What is this about?" she asked, her voice betraying her unease. He took his time settling into his chair, his gaze never leaving her. "I've been thinking about you," he said slowly, "and about my daughter, Lila." Isabella's heart clenched at the mention of the little girl. She had tried to push the memory of Lila and her question from her mind, but it had stayed with her, unbidden. "I'm just a waitress," Isabella said quickly, trying to steer the conversation away from anything personal. "I'm not really the person you need to be thinking about." The man leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "No, you're exactly the person I need to be thinking about." Isabella blinked, not understanding what he meant. "I don't understand," she said, her voice soft but tinged with confusion. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thick envelope. He slid it across the desk to her, his fingers brushing the surface with a quiet precision. "Take this," he said, his voice colder than before. "It's a gesture of appreciation. For Lila." Isabella hesitated, looking down at the envelope. She wasn't sure what it contained, but she could guess it was something substantial. Her eyes flickered back to the man. "I don't need anything from you," she said, her voice firmer now. "I'm just trying to do the right thing. For Lila. She needs someone, but I can't be the one to." "You are the one," he interrupted, his voice cutting through her protest. "I've watched you, Isabella. I know what you're capable of. Lila needs someone who can understand her, someone who isn't afraid to take care of her." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. "I'm not equipped for this. You're exactly what she needs," the man said again, his voice lowering, almost a whisper. "And I'm offering you the chance to help her heal. You're not just a waitress, Isabella. You have the strength to make a difference in her life." Isabella felt a strange twist in her chest. She wasn't sure if it was the weight of his words or something deeper, something in her own heart that had always longed for a purpose beyond her daily grind. She had never thought of herself as someone who could change anything, but here was this powerful man, offering her a chance to be someone's savior. It was too much to comprehend all at once. The silence stretched between them for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Isabella opened the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled out a stack of bills. Her breath caught in her throat as she glanced at the amount. It was far more money than she had ever made in a month. "What is this?" she asked, looking back at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "A gift," he said, "to help you start a new life. If you want it. If you want to help my daughter, I will make sure you have everything you need. All I ask in return is that you care for her. Look after her. Make sure she grows up safe." Isabella didn't know what to say. The offer was overwhelming, and yet, there was a part of her that was drawn to it, to the possibility of something bigger than herself. "I can't promise anything," she said, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I'm just a waitress. I don't have the answers." The man gave her a small, knowing smile. "You don't need to have all the answers, Isabella. All you need to do is be there for her." His words rang in her ears as she left the office. She didn't know what she had just agreed to, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life was never going to be the same. Isabella walked out of the office, the heavy envelope still clutched in her hands, the weight of it pressing against her chest like a constant reminder of the man's offer. She didn't know what she had just agreed to. The money, the promise, the responsibility, everything was a blur, and yet, there was an undeniable pull that kept her moving forward. Her thoughts were a whirlwind as she walked back through the restaurant, past the bustling kitchen and the busy waitstaff, trying to steady her breathing. She felt like she had been handed the keys to a new life. But the question was, did she want it? The restaurant felt different now, like a cage she was slowly outgrowing. It was a life she had known for years, but now it seemed so small compared to what was being offered to her. She didn't belong here anymore, not when there were bigger things at play, things that might just give her a purpose. As she entered the break room to collect her things, Isabella's mind kept drifting back to Lila, the little girl who had asked her the question that had shattered the quiet of her ordinary life. Are you my mommy? It was a simple question, but it had the weight of 1,000 unspoken words behind it. Lila had been through so much already, and Isabella could feel the ache in her chest as she thought about the girl's sad eyes. It wasn't just the money or the offer that had drawn her in. It was Lila's need for someone to care, someone to protect her from a world that had already been too harsh. She couldn't ignore it. She couldn't walk away. That night, as Isabella lay in bed in her small apartment, the envelope resting on the table beside her, she tried to think through what she was about to do. She had never been someone who made big decisions, who took risks. She was just a girl from Queens, working to survive, hoping for a better future. But this was different. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Lila, and it was about doing something bigger than she had ever imagined. The next morning, as she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her uniform before heading out, Isabella made her decision. She had to help Lila. She had to step into that world, no matter how dangerous it might be, no matter how much she didn't understand. And as much as she wanted to pretend that she could walk away from all of it, she knew she couldn't. She was already in too deep. When she arrived at the restaurant, the man was already there, waiting for her. He was standing near the entrance, his back straight, his eyes scanning the room with that same cold, calculating gaze. His presence seemed to fill the space, and Isabella could feel the tension in the air. He was everything she was not, powerful, composed, untouchable. But for some reason, he had chosen her. He had trusted her with something bigger than herself. "You're here," he said when he saw her, his voice low and commanding. Isabella nodded, swallowing the lump that had formed in her throat. "I'm here." He didn't say anything else, but nodded toward the back of the restaurant. She followed him again, the weight of her decision pressing down on her with each step. As they entered the private area, Isabella noticed that the atmosphere was different now. It wasn't just a restaurant, it was a fortress. Everything about the place screamed wealth and power, from the dark wood paneling to the thick velvet curtains. It was a world she wasn't used to, but one she was quickly becoming a part of. The man sat at the large wooden table, motioning for her to take a seat. She did, her hands resting on her lap, unsure of what to say next. "Lila needs someone," he said, breaking the silence. "I don't know if you realize this, but you've already made a difference in her life. She doesn't trust easily, and yet she chose to open up to you." Isabella looked down at her hands, unable to meet his gaze. "I don't know what I'm doing," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not qualified to be someone's mom, especially not hers." The man leaned forward, his eyes intense as they locked onto hers. "I'm not asking you to be her mother," he said softly. "I'm asking you to be there for her, to give her something she's never had, security. She's been through more than most people can imagine. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be there." Isabella felt a lump form in her throat, the weight of his words sinking in. She had never thought of herself as someone who could help heal a broken child. But here she was, being asked to do just that. "What about you?" she asked, finally looking up. "What's your role in all of this?" The man's expression softened, but there was a hardness to his gaze that made her uneasy. "I'm her father," he said, "and I will do whatever it takes to protect her. But I can't always be there. That's where you come in." Isabella nodded slowly, feeling the gravity of the situation. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She couldn't walk away from this. Lila needed her, and for the first time in a long while, Isabella felt like she might actually be able to make a difference in someone's life. As she left the restaurant later that evening, the weight of the day's decisions still heavy on her shoulders, Isabella knew she had crossed a line she could never uncross. She was now part of something far bigger than herself, and no matter how much she wanted to go back to the life she knew, there was no going back. This was her new reality, and she was going to have to face it, no matter what came next. Isabella's days quickly began to blend together, each one feeling more surreal than the last. She was adjusting to the new reality she had stepped into, the world of Lila and her powerful father. The money, the power, the responsibility, everything had happened so fast, and yet there was no turning back now. The man had made it clear. She was expected to step in and play a role in Lila's life. He didn't ask her to be the perfect mother. He didn't expect her to have all the answers. He only asked her to care, to be there when Lila needed someone. That was enough. Or so it seemed. The first few days after agreeing to help were strange. Isabella found herself meeting with Lila more often, sitting with her in the quiet corners of the restaurant while the world carried on around them. Lila wasn't an easy child. Her silence spoke volumes. Her eyes told stories of loss and hurt far beyond her years. Isabella did what she could, talking to her softly, trying to get her to open up, but the little girl was a fortress. Yet, there were moments, fleeting but real, when Lila seemed to soften, when her cold, distant demeanor would crack, just enough for Isabella to see a glimpse of the child beneath. The first time Lila smiled at her, it was small, almost imperceptible, but to Isabella, it felt like the world. It was enough to make her keep going. But as much as she tried to make progress with Lila, the man, her father, was never far from her thoughts. He had warned her. He had made it clear that she was stepping into a world of consequences, a world where her actions would matter far beyond anything she had ever known. The feeling of being constantly watched was never far from her mind. Every time she stepped into the restaurant, she felt his eyes on her. Every time she made a move, every decision, she felt as though he were calculating it. Isabella wasn't sure what to make of him. He was intimidating, commanding, yet there was a part of her that couldn't deny the way he looked at her. It wasn't with the usual coldness of a man who viewed her as just another person to be controlled. No, there was something more. There was a flicker of something deeper, something almost protective. It confused her. She had never been part of something so complex, so dangerous. Yet there she was, playing a role she hadn't even known existed in her life. One afternoon, after another round of therapy with Lila, Isabella was called into the back office again. The man was there, sitting at his desk, looking every bit the Mafia boss he was. His demeanor was calm, but there was an edge to it that made Isabella's heart beat a little faster. "Sit down, Isabella," he said, his voice cool, but not unkind. She obeyed, sitting across from him, trying to ignore the flutter of nerves in her stomach. "How is she doing?" he asked, his gaze fixed on her. Isabella hesitated, unsure of what to say. She's still closed off," she said slowly. "But I think I'm getting through to her. Little by little, she's starting to open up." The man nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good. But be careful." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "She's been through a lot, and she doesn't trust easily. I know she's beginning to trust you, but don't mistake that for weakness." Isabella nodded, feeling a shiver run down her spine. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'm not here to hurt her." The man leaned forward, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "I know, but the world she lives in, it's dangerous. You have to be careful who you trust. People like us don't have the luxury of trusting anyone." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. "People like us?" she repeated, confusion in her voice. "What do you mean?" He gave her a small, calculating smile. "I mean, you're in this now. You've made a choice, and that choice comes with consequences. You may not understand everything yet, but you will." The room suddenly felt smaller, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "I'm just trying to help," she said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "I'm not looking for anything more." The man's smile faded, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And that's exactly what I need you to do. Help her. Don't get too involved. Just help her heal." Isabella couldn't help but wonder if that was possible. Could she really help heal a child who had been through so much? Could she really make a difference in Lila's life without becoming entangled in the dangerous world that surrounded them? She didn't know. But one thing was clear. She was already in too deep. The man was right. She had made a choice, and now she would have to live with it. As she left the office and made her way back to the front of the restaurant, Isabella felt a growing sense of unease. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew it wasn't going to be easy. Lila needed her. And now, more than ever, Isabella needed to figure out how far she was willing to go to protect her. The days that followed felt like an unraveling thread. Each moment spent with Lila was another step deeper into a world that Isabella wasn't sure she could navigate. But she was there, day after day, doing what she could to help the little girl who had stolen a piece of her heart with just a simple question. Are you my mommy? The question kept echoing in Isabella's mind, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized how unprepared she was for what she had agreed to. Every time she entered the mansion-like estate where Lila and her father lived, she couldn't escape the overwhelming feeling that she was being watched. The guards, the quiet conversations in the corners, the powerful, unspoken presence of the Mafia world, it all weighed heavily on her. But it was for Lila, and that made it all worth it. One afternoon, as Isabella sat with Lila in the drawing room, trying to coax her into drawing something more than the sad, empty images she usually scribbled, the door opened with a soft creak. Isabella looked up, heart skipping a beat when she saw him. He was always there, always watching from the shadows. Lila's father, the man whose world Isabella was now tangled in. His gaze was sharp, assessing, but there was something softer in his expression as he looked at his daughter. Lila didn't seem to notice him at first, too absorbed in her drawing. But Isabella felt the shift in the air when she looked up and saw him standing in the doorway. How is she doing? He asked, his voice low but soft. Isabella hesitated, looking at Lila, who had finally started to draw something. A simple figure with no real features, but it was something. She's doing better, Isabella said quietly. She's still not talking much, but she's drawing now. I think that's progress. The man nodded, his eyes briefly flickering to the page before returning to Isabella's face. She's had a rough life, he said, his voice filled with a quiet sorrow that caught Isabella off guard. I know, but we'll get through this. She just needs time. Isabella looked at Lila again, her heart aching for the little girl who had been forced to grow up too fast. How are you? The man asked, his question coming out of nowhere. Isabella blinked, taken aback. I'm fine, she said a little too quickly. It's a lot to process. He didn't reply right away. Instead, he moved into the room and sat across from her, his gaze never leaving her face. You're a lot stronger than you think, he said quietly. Isabella felt a lump in her throat, unsure of what to say. She had been doing everything she could for Lila, trying to help her through the silence and the pain, but she had never felt more out of her depth. I don't know if I'm strong enough, Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I'm the right person for this. The man's eyes softened, and he leaned forward slightly. You are, he said firmly. Lila needs you. She needs someone who cares, and you're the one who's been there for her. Isabella swallowed, her hands trembling slightly. I'm just trying to help, she said quietly. The man nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. And that's enough. His words hung in the air, and for the first time since meeting him, Isabella felt something shift inside her. The tension she had been carrying with her, the uncertainty about where she fit into this world, seemed to ease just a little. Maybe she didn't have to be perfect. Maybe she didn't have to have all the answers. She just had to be there. And that was enough. The man stood up, his presence commanding as always, but there was something in his demeanor that made Isabella feel connected in a strange way. You're doing well, Isabella, he said, his voice quieter now, almost approving. Don't doubt yourself. He turned to leave, but before he stepped out the door, he paused. And if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. Isabella nodded, her heart racing. She didn't know what to think of him, of his words, or of the world she had just stepped into. But one thing was clear, she couldn't back out now. She had made a choice, and that choice was to stay with Lila, to help her heal, even if it meant stepping further into the shadows of a world she didn't fully understand. As the door clicked shut behind him, Isabella sat there for a moment, staring at the empty doorway. She could still feel his presence, his words echoing in her mind. You're stronger than you think. Maybe she was. Maybe she could do this after all. But with every step she took in this new world, She knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back. And as much as the thought scared her, there was a part of her that felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Isabella woke up to the sound of the city below. The constant hum of traffic and distant sirens making the early morning feel like a distant echo. She had barely slept, her mind racing with the decisions she had made in the past few days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lila's face. The wide, trusting eyes that had asked the one question that had changed everything. Are you my mommy? She had never been more unsure of anything in her life. She wasn't a mother. She didn't know how to be one. But something inside her had shifted. Maybe it was the promise she had made to Lila. Or maybe it was the pull of the man who had taken her into his world, his dangerous, complex world. Isabella could no longer pretend she was just a waitress. She had already made the decision to be something more, and now she had to live with it. The world she had entered was not the one she had been prepared for. It was a world of secrets, of power, and of consequences. But as she sat up on the edge of her bed, the decision still felt like it had been made for her. The man's words kept echoing in her mind. You're stronger than you think. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was capable of more than she realized. She had to be. For Lila. And for herself. The next few days were a blur of responsibilities that Isabella had never imagined. Her time at the restaurant became secondary to her role as Lila's caretaker. She had started spending more time at the mansion, helping Lila with her drawings, sitting with her in silence, trying to build the trust that the little girl so desperately needed. But the more time she spent with Lila, the more she began to see how much damage had been done. Lila was a child who had learned to close herself off from the world. Every day was a battle to get her to open up, to show even the smallest glimpse of the girl who might have been before the pain had taken over. But Isabella didn't give up. She couldn't. The man, Lila's father, had told her to help, and that was exactly what she was going to do. One afternoon, as they sat together, Lila looked up at her with a rare expression of curiosity. Are you my mommy now? She asked. Again, her voice hesitant. The question cut through Isabella like a knife. She didn't know how to answer. She had never been anyone's mother. But she could see the hope in Lila's eyes, and it was both heartbreaking and beautiful. Isabella swallowed hard and forced a smile. No, sweetie, she said softly. I'm not your mommy. But I'm here to help you, okay? Lila nodded slowly, and for the first time in weeks, there was a flicker of understanding in her eyes. Isabella could see the walls beginning to crack, just a little. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. That night, after Lila had gone to bed, Isabella found herself standing in front of the window in the study, staring out at the city lights. She had tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself that she was doing the right thing, but the truth was undeniable. She had stepped into a world that wasn't hers, and she wasn't sure if she could ever get out. The man's words haunted her. You're in this now. She didn't know how much longer she could play this role. But just as she was about to turn away from the window, she heard a soft knock at the door. The man entered quietly, his presence filling the room in an instant. Isabella, he said, his voice low, how is she? Isabella took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She's trying, she said, her voice soft. But it's going to take time. He nodded, stepping closer. I know, he said. She's been through more than most people can imagine. But you're doing well. I see the way she's responding to you. Isabella shook her head. I'm not sure I'm doing enough, she admitted. I don't know if I'm cut out for this. The man's gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw a glimpse of something other than cold calculation in his eyes. You're doing fine, he said quietly. You're more capable than you think. And that's what she needs. Someone who believes in her. Someone who won't give up on her. Isabella didn't know what to say. The man had always been so distant, so in control, and yet in that moment, there was something different. Something almost protective. It made her feel vulnerable. I'm trying, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. But I'm scared. I'm scared. That I'm not enough. That I can't fix her. The man stood there for a moment, his gaze fixed on her. You don't have to fix her, he said, his voice steady. You just have to be there. You're already doing more than anyone else has ever done. Isabella looked up at him, unsure of what to say next. She had never imagined that she would be in a position like this. But here she was, standing in the middle of a world she didn't understand, trying to help a little girl heal from wounds she couldn't even begin to comprehend. The man stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. Don't worry, Isabella, he said softly. You're not alone in this. I'll be here to help, too. Isabella nodded, the weight of his words settling over her. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. She couldn't walk away now. Not with Lila depending on her. Not with everything that had been set in motion. She would keep going. For Lila. For herself. And for the hope that one day, the little girl would finally find a way to trust again. Days blurred together for Isabella, her life slowly transforming into a routine that no longer felt like her own. Lila's presence in the mansion was the one constant, and though Isabella had promised herself she'd stay focused on helping the little girl heal, she was finding it harder to ignore the growing complexity of her situation. The man, the one who had brought her into this world, was always just a step behind. His power, his control, it loomed over everything, even in the quietest moments. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at play here than she understood, but for now, her focus was on Lila. The girl had made little progress in the past few days, but something was different. Lila had started drawing more, and one evening, for the first time in weeks, she had smiled at Isabella without hesitation. It was a fleeting smile, but it was something. Maybe there's hope, Isabella thought, trying to push aside the doubts that crept in when she was alone. Lila had begun trusting her, just a little. That was enough for now. As Isabella sat in the drawing room with Lila, they were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. The man stepped inside, his presence once again filling the space. Isabella had learned to anticipate his arrival, but every time he entered, it was as if the air itself shifted. He moved toward them, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Lila. The little girl didn't look up immediately, still lost in her drawing. "How's she doing?" the man asked, his voice low, almost indifferent, but there was something in it that made Isabella pause. "She's trying," Isabella replied, setting her hand gently on Lila's shoulder. "But it's slow. She's been through a lot, and it's going to take time." The man's gaze softened for a brief moment as he looked at Lila. Then he turned his attention back to Isabella. "I know," he said quietly, his tone carrying a weight that only someone who had lived through the same kind of pain could understand. "I've seen what she's been through. But you're doing well. Better than anyone expected." Isabella didn't know how to respond to that. She wasn't doing anything special. She was just trying to be there for Lila in a way that no one had been before. But she couldn't help feeling a strange sense of validation from his words. "She's tough," he added, almost to himself. "But we can't afford to let her shut down. She's too important for that." Isabella looked at him, sensing the shift in his tone. There was something more behind his words now. "She needs someone to care for her," he continued, stepping closer, his gaze unwavering. "And I think you're the one to do it." Isabella felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. She had no idea what she was doing, but there was no going back now. She had already made a promise, not just to Lila, but to herself. She would help the girl heal. "I'm trying," she said softly, her voice filled with more determination than she had felt in days. The man nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. "That's all anyone can ask for," he said. "But remember, Isabella, you can't do this alone. We're in this together. I'll be here to support you, but you have to keep pushing forward." For her, his words hung in the air, and for a moment, Isabella felt a weight settle on her shoulders. She was in too deep now. There was no turning back. But as she looked at Lila, still focused on her drawing, she knew she couldn't walk away. Not now. The man stood up, and as he turned to leave, he paused. "I'll have someone check in with you tomorrow," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Make sure everything's going well." Isabella nodded, unsure of what to make of his comment. "Thank you," she said, not sure if she was thanking him for the support or the pressure he had just added to her already heavy burden. As the man walked out of the room, Isabella sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation crashing down on her. She didn't know what the future held, but she did know one thing. Lila was depending on her. And for the first time in a long while, Isabella felt a sense of purpose, however uncertain and terrifying it might be. Lila needed her, and that was enough to keep her moving forward. The days stretched on, and the tension in Isabella's life seemed to grow with each passing moment. Her time was divided between her regular shifts at the restaurant and her increasingly frequent visits to the mansion. Every day, she saw more of Lila's walls crumble, but she also saw how deep those walls ran. The little girl had suffered more than anyone should, and Isabella could see it now, in the small gestures, in the way Lila's eyes darted around the room when someone raised their voice, the way she flinched at the slightest noise. Yet, she was slowly beginning to trust Isabella, slowly beginning to open up. The world she had been thrust into was far more complicated than Isabella had imagined, and she could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. The man, Lila's father, was always close by, always watching. His presence was like a shadow that never left her. He had said that they were in this together, but the more time she spent with him, the more she realized how little she truly knew about him. He was dangerous, yes. Powerful, certainly. But there was something else there too, something softer, hidden behind those cold, calculating eyes. As much as she didn't want to admit it, Isabella found herself drawn to him. The connection between them was undeniable, but she refused to think too much about it. She couldn't. There were more important things at stake. But even as she focused on Lila, on helping her heal, she couldn't escape the feeling that her own life was slowly becoming intertwined with the man's in ways she didn't fully understand. One evening, as Isabella sat with Lila in the library, watching her quietly trace patterns on the page, the door to the room opened. Isabella looked up, her breath catching when she saw him. The man entered, his presence filling the space like it always did. Lila didn't seem to notice, still lost in her drawing. The man's gaze softened for a moment as he looked at his daughter, and then he turned to Isabella. "How's she doing?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Isabella hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to say. "She's doing better," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's still slow. She's getting there, but it'll take time." He nodded, stepping closer. "I know," he said, his voice almost tender now. "It's not easy for her. But she trusts you, and that's a big step. I've seen how she looks at you. That's progress." Isabella's heart fluttered at his words, but she pushed the feeling aside. She couldn't afford to get too attached, not to him, and certainly not to Lila. "I'm doing my best," she said, her voice steady but unsure. "But it's hard. She's been through so much." The man's expression darkened slightly, and he stepped closer, his gaze locking onto hers. "She has," he said quietly. "And that's why you can't give up. She's counting on you now. I'm counting on you." Isabella felt the weight of his words settle in her chest, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if she could breathe. She didn't know how to be what Lila needed. She wasn't prepared for this kind of responsibility, and yet here she was, caught in a web of promises and expectations. "I don't know if I can do this," Isabella admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not her mother. I'm not even close." The man's gaze softened, and he reached out, his hand brushing hers lightly. "You don't have to be her mother," he said gently. "You just have to be there. That's all she needs right now. Someone who will care for her, someone who won't walk away." Isabella's heart skipped a beat as she looked at him. His words were simple, but they carried an undeniable truth. She wasn't her mother, but maybe, just maybe, she could be the one to show Lila that she was worth caring about, that she wasn't alone. The man stood up, taking a step back. "I'll be in my office," he said quietly, his voice almost softer now. "If you need anything, you know where to find me." Isabella watched him leave, her mind racing. She had no idea where she stood with him, but one thing was clear, she had made a decision, and there was no turning back. She would help Lila, even if it meant facing the unknown. She would be there for her. As the door clicked shut behind him, Isabella turned back to Lila, who was still drawing in silence. She didn't know how much longer she could keep up the charade of being just a waitress, just a caretaker. But she had made a promise, and she would keep it. For Lila, for herself, and for whatever future lay ahead, no matter how uncertain it might be. The days following their conversation were heavy, each one pulling Isabella deeper into the world she was trying to avoid. She woke up every morning with a sense of dread, not knowing if she was ready for what lay ahead. Lila had started to make small improvements, but those moments were fleeting. The little girl's silence was still her armor, and Isabella had learned that getting through to her was not as easy as she had hoped. But one thing was certain, Lila was starting to trust her, even if just a little. Isabella spent more time in the mansion now, waking early to help get Lila dressed, feeding her, and trying to coax her into talking or even just drawing. She wasn't a therapist, and she didn't have the tools or training to fix what was broken inside the girl. But she was here, and that was more than anyone else had been. At night, after Lila went to bed, Isabella would find herself sitting by the window in the study, her mind racing with doubts. The man, Lila's father, had made it clear that he expected her to be more than just a caretaker. He wanted her to help his daughter heal, but Isabella wasn't sure she could. She wasn't qualified for this. She was just a waitress. Just a girl from Queens who had stepped into a dangerous world she didn't belong in. She felt the weight of his words, "You're stronger than you think," bearing down on her. But the more time she spent in this mansion, surrounded by the opulence and the constant hum of Mafia business, the more she questioned whether she was strong enough to handle it. The man's presence was always just behind her, never too far. She would see him in passing, always with that air of authority, always with that coldness in his gaze. But when it was just the two of them, when they spoke one-on-one, there was a softness in his voice that took her off guard. He was a man of contradictions, of danger and care, and Isabella found herself tangled in those contradictions, unable to figure out where she stood. One evening, after a long day spent with Lila, Isabella sat at the dining table, her mind a blur. The sound of the front door closing made her glance up, and there he was again, the man who had brought her into this world. His suit was perfectly tailored, his presence commanding as always. He stopped just inside the doorway, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Isabella. "How is she?" he asked, his voice steady. Isabella hesitated, her heart skipping a beat. She's still struggling," she said, her voice unsure. "But she's drawing more. That's something." The man nodded, his gaze shifting to Lila's drawings scattered across the table. He didn't speak for a moment, just observed, and then he sighed softly. "She's been through more than a child should ever experience," he said quietly, as if to himself. Isabella didn't know how to respond. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, she realized just how deep the scars ran in this family. "I know," she said softly. "I can see it. But I'm trying. I don't know how much more I can do, but I'm trying." The man turned to face her fully, his gaze sharp. "You're doing more than anyone else has," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "You're the only one who's been there for her, who hasn't turned away. That matters more than you think." Isabella swallowed, unsure of what to say. His words, the praise, it was unexpected, but it also made her feel more pressure than ever. She wasn't ready to take on this responsibility, and yet here she was, doing everything she could. "I don't know if I can be the one she needs," Isabella admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." The man studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he took a step closer. "You are strong enough," he said quietly. "You just don't realize it yet. Lila needs someone like you. Someone who can see past the walls she's built and help her find her way back to who she was before all of this." Isabella felt a lump form in her throat. "But I don't know how to do that. I'm not a therapist. I'm not her mother. I don't know what she needs." He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. "You don't have to be a therapist," he said softly. "You just have to be there for her. You're already doing that." Isabella felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her, but she also felt a strange sense of clarity. The doubt, the fear, it was all still there, but it was starting to fade just a little. Maybe she wasn't meant to be the perfect solution, but she could be the one Lila needed right now. She could be the one who didn't give up on her. "I'll keep trying," Isabella said, her voice filled with a newfound determination. The man gave her a small smile, a fleeting gesture that made him seem almost human, not the cold, calculating figure he usually was. "That's all I ask," he said quietly. "That's all she needs." As he turned to leave, Isabella sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything he had said. She had made a promise to herself and to Lila, and for the first time, she felt like she could keep that promise. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was no longer as afraid as she had been. She wasn't in this alone. She had Lila's trust, and she had the man's support, even if it wasn't always clear how far that support would go. But it was enough. For now, it was enough. The days stretched on, each one passing like a page in a book Isabella wasn't sure she wanted to read. Lila was doing better in her own way. She had started drawing again, her once blank pages now filled with abstract shapes, strange little creatures, and occasionally, a faint outline of what might be a smile. But as much as she was trying to help, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that she was always just a step behind, as if she were trying to catch up to a life she wasn't meant to live. The man, Lila's father, remained a constant presence. He was everywhere, watching from a distance, always there when Isabella least expected him. He never said much, but when he did, it was as if the weight of the world was behind his words. He had promised to help her, but Isabella didn't always know what that meant. Was he helping because he wanted to? Or was it because he had no other choice? Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that there were more layers to him than she could ever understand, and that made her feel vulnerable. That evening, after a long day with Lila, Isabella found herself sitting in the quiet of the drawing room, staring at the flickering fireplace. It had been a long day. She had spent hours sitting with Lila, trying to coax her into talking, trying to break down the walls that had been built so high. The little girl still didn't speak much, but there were small moments, glimpses of the person Lila might become if she could just trust someone enough. Isabella was doing her best, but the pressure was starting to get to her. She didn't know how much longer she could keep up this act, pretending like she was fine, pretending like everything was okay. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. She looked up, and before she could say anything, the door opened. There he was again, the man, the one who had been so distant, yet somehow, always present. He stepped into the room without a word, his presence filling the space in a way that felt almost suffocating. Isabella stood up, unsure of how to respond. He looked at her for a moment, his gaze searching, before speaking. "How is she?" His voice was low, steady, but there was a hint of something else in it. Concern? Was that what she heard? Isabella hesitated. She's getting better," she said, unsure of how to answer without sounding like she was making excuses. "But it's still slow. She's not exactly ready to open up yet." The man nodded slowly, as if he expected this. "She won't open up easily. She's been hurt too much to trust anyone," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. Isabella wasn't sure what to say to that. "I'm trying my best," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not sure I'm what she needs." The man took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You are," he said simply. "You're exactly what she needs." Isabella felt a strange pang in her chest, a mix of uncertainty and something else she couldn't quite identify. "I'm not her mother," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can be what she needs." The man's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, he looked almost human, as if the walls he had built around himself had cracked, just a little. "You don't have to be her mother," he said softly. "You just have to be there for her. That's what she needs. Someone who cares. Someone who will stay." Isabella swallowed, trying to process what he was saying. She had never felt like she could be someone's savior. She was just a waitress, a girl from the streets of Queens trying to make a better life for herself. But here she was, being asked to step into something bigger, something more dangerous. "I'm trying," she said, her voice shaky. "But I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. I'm not even sure I know what I'm doing." The man stepped closer, and for the first time, his touch was gentle. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his fingers warm against her skin. "You are strong enough," he said quietly. "You just don't see it yet. Lila believes in you. I can see it. And that's what matters." Isabella closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. "I don't want to fail her," she whispered. The man's hand remained on her shoulder for a moment longer. Then he pulled away, his expression unreadable once again. "You won't," he said firmly. "You won't fail her. But you have to keep going. You're the only one she trusts. Don't let that go." As he turned to leave, Isabella watched him, feeling a mix of gratitude and fear. She had made a decision. She was going to help Lila. She didn't know how, and she didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she might actually be able to make a difference. She wasn't sure how much more she could give, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She was in it for the long haul. And no matter what came next, she would do everything in her power to help Lila find a way out of the darkness that had trapped her for so long. The weeks that followed felt like a new chapter in Isabella's life, one she hadn't written but was now forced to read. She had done what she thought was impossible. She had stepped into a world she didn't understand, and though she was still fumbling her way through it, she was beginning to realize she had become more than just an outsider. She was part of this world now, part of Lila's world. Every day, she spent more time with the little girl, watching her slowly heal, watching the trust that had been buried deep inside her start to surface. Lila still didn't speak much, but Isabella could see the difference in her eyes. The pain was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it was no longer all-consuming. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The man, Lila's father, was as distant as ever, though his gaze never failed to follow Isabella's movements when she was around. He didn't need to say anything for her to know that he was watching, assessing, waiting. She felt his presence, like a shadow at her back. There were moments when his icy demeanor would crack, when he would show a glimmer of warmth, usually in the quietest of moments. But Isabella couldn't get too comfortable. She couldn't forget who he was. The world he controlled was dangerous, and he had made it clear that she was only involved because of Lila. As much as Isabella had grown fond of him, as much as she had begun to understand the complexity of the man he was, she knew her place in this world. She was here for Lila, nothing more, nothing less. One evening, as Isabella sat by the fireplace in the study, Lila curled up beside her with her drawing pad. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn. The man entered the room without a word, his presence as commanding as always. But tonight, there was something different in his eyes, a weight, a quiet urgency. He didn't speak immediately, his gaze flicking to Lila, who was lost in her drawings once again. Isabella could see the softness in his eyes when he looked at his daughter. For the briefest moment, the powerful Mafia boss seemed like a father, nothing more, nothing less. Then he turned his attention to Isabella. "How is she?" he asked, his voice more serious than usual. Isabella looked down at Lila, her heart swelling with affection for the little girl. "She's better," she said softly. "She's still working through a lot, but she's starting to open up. It's slow, but it's something." The man nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. "She needs you, Isabella. I know that. But you need to understand something. You can't protect her from everything. The world we live in, it's dangerous. And there are people who won't hesitate to use her to get to me." Isabella felt a chill run through her at his words. She had always known that there was danger, but hearing it from him, with that sharp, unwavering look in his eyes, made it real in a way she hadn't prepared for. "I won't let anything happen to her," Isabella said, her voice firm. The man's expression softened for a moment, but his eyes remained sharp. "I know you won't. But it's not just about you. You're a part of this now, Isabella. You're involved whether you like it or not. And there are consequences to that. To everything." He paused for a moment, as if deciding whether to say more. "I need you to understand the stakes here," he continued. "I don't want to put you in danger, but you're already here. You're already part of this world. And I won't let anyone hurt you, or Lila. But it's going to take more than just your good intentions to keep us safe." Isabella nodded, feeling the weight of his words sink in. She had been living in a bubble, thinking she could protect Lila and herself with simple kindness and care. But that wasn't enough in this world. It wasn't enough to just want to protect someone. She had to be prepared to fight for it, to do whatever it took. "I understand," she said quietly, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'll do whatever it takes." The man studied her for a moment, and then, to her surprise, he nodded slowly. "Good," he said, his voice almost approving. "You're stronger than you think. You've already done more for her than most people ever would." Isabella felt a mixture of pride and fear. She wasn't sure if she could handle everything he was asking of her, but she knew she couldn't back out now. Not when Lila needed her. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. The man gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile before turning to leave. "Make sure you're ready, Isabella," he said over his shoulder. "This world doesn't forgive mistakes." Isabella watched him leave, the weight of his words settling deep in her chest. She was ready to face whatever came next, but as the door closed behind him, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. She had stepped into something far bigger than herself, and no matter how much she wanted to pretend she was just a waitress in a dangerous world, she knew she had already become a part of it. She had already made the choice to protect Lila, to help her heal, and she couldn't turn back now. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time, Isabella felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. She wasn't alone anymore, and neither was Lila. Ivan's world of dark romance unfolds in this captivating journey, where Isabella, a simple waitress, finds herself caught in the dangerous web of a mafia boss and his emotionally scarred daughter, Lila. As Isabella is drawn into this dark romance, she must navigate her own feelings while trying to protect the fragile little girl who asks her, are you my mommy? The Mafia boss watches over them both, his power and control evident. But there's something more to him that Isabella can't fully understand. She is torn between the dangers of the dark romance world she has stepped into and the promise she has made to Lila. As the layers of this world unfold, Isabella finds herself unable to escape the pull of a dangerous connection. With each passing day, Isabella's bond with Lila deepens, and her role in this dark romance grows. Can Isabella rise above the shadows and protect Lila from the dangers lurking in the Mafia's underworld? This dark romance takes Isabella and Lila on a journey of trust, healing, and a fight for survival. As Isabella faces her own fears, the dark romance between her and the Mafia boss starts to take shape, leaving her to wonder if she can truly escape the past. With the stakes higher than ever, this dark romance leaves Isabella questioning if love and loyalty can overcome the darkness that surrounds them.